All right. So thank you. um, Sorry, Phil, for giving you a hard time pronouncing all those German stuff. And I'm happy that my kind of joke worked out. I'm a managing director at a company named gandke, based in Mönchengladbach in Germany. And so that was not too easy to read, I guess. Um, the joke about managing director is we are a little agency with a headcount of 6.5, including 3 owners. So there's no real managing director job to be done. All right. And today I have let's phrase it like this. I am inappropriately excited to talk to you about a very boring topic, which is consent mode. And you may catch me once or twice calling it consent mode for a very easy reason, because in Germany we have a German word for consent mode, which is Einwilligungsmodus, but nobody really uses it. So we call it consent mode, because one thing about Germans is true. We pronounce everything so that it's ready to be shouted at people in football stadiums or stuff like that. So it's consent mode and not consent mode, but I try to pronounce it the right way. Okay, with that, some of you may have seen the funny and light video about consent mode from Google and implementing it. This is another slide from a Google presentation, which shows us what consent mode is, or at least what we thought consent mode was before December of last year. And we see Marie. Marie does something I can't explain and then clicks on an ad, goes to a website and then declines cookies, which is, in my opinion, the first misinterpretation of what GDPR and consent is all about. It's not about cookies, but it's about purposes. It's about vendors and services and stuff like that, and not just cookies alone. But let's keep it like it is. She declines cookies, and then Google Consent Mode still allows you to use cookieless pings. We will look at those cookieless pings in detail shortly. And then you get data in a sense of modeled conversions. So implementing consent mode brings you as a benefit, and that's the only thing that it's all about, brings you back about 50% of the conversions that you lose. Some people say 60%, 65%. However, you get conversions back that you wouldn't be able to measure because there is no consent. And then in December, consent mode V2 came around and added 2 additional flags: add user data and add personalization. And what was really new is that those flags should be included in every hit you send to Google Analytics or Google Ads or Floodlight tags, in order to be able to need them for conversion tracking, data activation, and all that stuff you need for advertising. So even if you didn't opt into consent mode as we knew it, now you must at least use some basic consent mode that consists of firing tags only when there's consent, but initializing consent mode at first, so those 2 additional flags can get added to the requests you send over to the Google services. And what we also learned is that advanced versus basic consent mode is not really a new thing, but nobody really used basic consent mode. All implementations I knew until end of last year were about advanced consent mode, so sending signals when there is no consent at all. And we can see that in another slide from a Google presentation that for any reason shortly disappeared after we could see the live stream and the recording of it. It's the difference between standard consent mode and advanced consent mode. So there are the new signals and what they are doing. And we now know that there is something like advanced consent mode, and basic consent mode, which consists in not firing or blocking tags until there really is consent given for analytics and or marketing purposes. So why do I think advanced consent mode is not really a good thing? I hear people have very, very different opinions about implementing consent mode V2 and advanced consent mode. And there are, some of them are saying, well, there are just cookieless pings, there's no personal data involved. It is unclear what gets sent there. But I don't understand that, because you can look at your browser and in your network tab, and you can see what gets sent over to Google when you activate advanced consent mode and send data without having consent, and so without any cookies. I did that in a video, and I give you the link to a diff where you can see what I recorded. This was before V2 came around, so we don't have all those parameters, but it's basically the same thing. On the left side in red, you can see what happens when there's consent, and on the other side in green, you can see when there's no consent. I should have switched that around, but nevertheless. So I visited a shopping site and bought something, and did that twice, once giving consent, once without consent, and then I recorded what happened in the network tab. And here you can see the difference between consent and no consent, which is basically in the first line in line 392. This is just a random combination of letters, and which is generated when the page loads. So this should be unique for every page load. So this is not really a difference. But you see the consent mode parameters, and you see a client ID. And the difference between having consent and no consent is, if there's consent, you have a constant client ID, which comes from a cookie. And if you don't have consent, then the client ID should be a new one after each page reload. And that's pretty much it. I bought something. So you can see what I bought here. The URL is slightly different, the session ID is different, but you have a different transaction ID, but still you have a transaction ID. In the line before that, you can see that you have still everything about what was bought. The difference after the event name, like the first visit and a session start markers, are what gets sent with every first hit after a page loads, because there is no session, no cookie for a session. So every first hit after a page load looks like a session start, but that's not really a problem. And so you can see the value, tax, shipping, all of that stuff is in there. You don't have any values that survive a page reload, but all other data is in there. So if you say I have no purchase, I have no problem, then look at this one. This is a regular page view. We see the same differences as in the purchase hit. And here we have some interesting data below here. These are custom dimensions, including personal data. And this data gets sent over to Google anyway in consent mode. I don't know which of these data points are really used or not used, but it's about what do you send there. And this is pretty much everything. So this is advanced consent mode. And this is why I cannot really recommend using it. Despite being a marketer, despite thinking 50 or 65% of lost conversions to get them back in your marketing is a real good thing, but I don't think it's worth what you have to invest in order to get those model conversions. All right. So what is basic consent mode? We look at some screenshots from Google Tag Assistant, where you can see what happens in the data layer which events are there, what tags get fired there. And there's a consent tab as well, where you can see how consent mode is initialized or updated, or if it's set anyway. So with this consent push, you get here from a tag, but it could come from your CMP or from your website directly coded into your web page's code. There's the consent defaults, which are denied at this point. And when you now start moving up the events, you can see that for every event, there's the default state, there's the current state, and if there was an update, you can see that as well. And if you start firing tags from now on, like if they're with event number 8 or 9 or 12 would be too late for advanced consent mode, then everything that fires now would fire in consent mode, not setting any cookies, but sending the data we just saw. And then there's another consent push. This is the consent update. And from now on, you can see after the on-page update, if you start firing your tags only when there is consent granted, then this would be basic mode, basically. So if you fire here with container loaded or DOM ready or window loaded, so all the events that happen in the data layer after consent was given and your consent tool or your tags in Google Tag Manager have initialized or updated consent according to whatever user choice was there, then you are fine, and then you work with basic consent mode. It's that simple. And this has to be done until the deadline, we all know. And the next part is about what would happen if we don't do that. And this is the only slide with AI involved. I asked for a what if cover with nerds instead of superheroes, and I got this what if cover. So whatever. So this is the what if part. What if we don't implement consent mode v2, or there is no add personalization flag, or it is denied? The simple answer is you have nothing, you can't build any audiences of any of those signals. So your audiences will, I guess, slightly decrease, or they will be empty after the deadline. We don't really know, but I would expect that they slowly decrease when you don't fill them up with new cookies where those flags were set. So no audiences would mean no remarketing list for search ads, and all that stuff that Thomas Actual here in this screenshot shows us. No audience exclusions, no import for GA audiences anymore, because we have no remarketing lists anymore that include the signals that Google needs in order to be able to activate the data you send there. If the other flag, the add user data flag, would be missing, then we if we happen to have implemented consent mode before those new flags were introduced, then there will be an add storage flag. And what Google does now is it converts the add storage value to an add user data value if this is not present. I think it's quite fair to do so, because in most cases in your consent management platform, when you have marketing consent or consent to Google Ads, then all those flags should be granted. So this is not really harmful, I guess. But if you already have consent mode in place, then it's a good idea to update to V2 and add those 2 new flags, because that's basically it. And if this flag is missing or it's denied, then the linking between GA4 and Google Ads stops. And so you can build no audiences, at least out of GA4 data. And there will be no conversions I guess we will see that. There is no Google Help page where you can really read that, but it has to be expected. Another place where you have to think about using consent mode signals, the two new flags, don't have anything to do with tagging a web page, because there is like the offline conversion import. There's this enhanced conversions for lead stuff where you upload data. There's the API, and in all those places in the last weeks, Google introduced those add user data and add personalization flags as well. Right now, if you send data in without those flags, Google tells you everything is okay. Google tells you everything is okay if you send them in with both flags with denied instead of granted. But just today, I read on LinkedIn that despite it's a successful import, those conversions won't appear in your reports until you have set both of those flags to granted. If this is really the case, many use cases for offline conversion import will really fail, because sometimes the data is generated out of weblogs or out of a consent-free web analytics solution, and there either was no consent or you don't know anymore if there was consent for ad personalization and the usage to track conversions. So if those flags have to be granted, you either have to lie, or you have to stop using your offline conversion import, or you have to make sure that you only upload conversions from people that in fact opted in. Okay. Another thing I heard of was you are in risk of your Google Ads account. It could get suspended if you don't implement consent mode v2, or you have to pay some DMA fines or whatever. And the third point is like a joke from my side. This is the only thing I didn't see out there. Agencies are threatening their own customers to implement because they are afraid of losing conversions in their Google Ads account. That's a sure thing, but you shouldn't use shady stuff like that to get your customers moving. Then this is a short slide about the why. Most of you might already know. Big tech firms have to pay big fines if they do something wrong. And in that regard, the Digital Markets Act now explicitly naming the gatekeepers and who has to obey some stricter rules maybe now. Include Google, and this is why we have this consent mode v2. And this is why we have to implement it, because they have a deadline, which is the 6th of March. And so this is our deadline. All right. And the last part is about how to implement and how to make sure that your implementation is right. The first question would be, how can I activate consent mode? And the easy answer, we heard it a few times today, is most consent tools already support it, and you just have to switch it on and you're ready to go. If that is not the case, or it might be necessary to at least add some HTML code to your web pages in order to have consent defaults if you want to use advanced consent mode. Or if you use Google Tag Manager, there are GTM templates here from Simo Ahava, which you can see in the screenshot, which you can use to push specific consent defaults or updates according to what the consent tool tells your tag manager using the data layer pushes, for example. And the next question would be, how can I check my setup? And I have 3 classes of answers for you. The first one would be the tag assistant, which we already saw. If you use the tag assistant, you can see at which point and under which consent conditions which tags fire. But if you see that a tag fires, it doesn't mean that it really does what you want to do. So the next thing to look at would be the network tab, like here in this screenshot. You can look for those collect network requests and switch to the payload view, and you can see those parameters then there. Let's go back there. It's the GCD parameter, and there is a GCS parameter as well, so you can look for them. There is Analytics Debugger, of course, from David Vallejo, which is a Chrome extension that I really heavily use. And there is an InfoTrust extension. It came up in the last 2 weeks, I guess. I have 2 words about that. It's a little bit of a warning, so I can't really recommend it at this point. And there's your Google Ads conversion diagnostics tab, and there's information in GA4 in the admin section when you look at your GA4 data stream as well. So using Analytics Debugger, for example, you can see those 2 parameters, which tell you about is consent given or not, like the last 2 ones from the first one, and all those R's in the second one can tell you what it's all about. You can use the table in the blog post that Phil already added to the chat. But it may be easier to use a plugin. And here in Consent Mode, in the Inspector extension from InfoTrust, you can see 2 things. You can see what is set to the data layer, including personalization storage and all that stuff. You wouldn't be able to read that only from looking at requests. So this has to be looking at the data layer as well. And then it gives you the meaning of the parameter, where those R's are translated to were denied by default and then granted after an update. So human readable, I like that, but a word of warning. You can run into a situation like this where you have only GA4 tagging, no Google Ads tagging, and when there is no Google Ad tag fired, I guess the result is not really true. As you can see in the background, I have a GA4 request in full consented consent mode going out, but the InfoTrust extension didn't really catch that. So if it tells you that there is no consent mode active, then maybe it's worth to give it a second look at your network tab. Okay. Then the 2 last things I mentioned was the diagnostics tab inside Google Ads, where you can see if it's implemented or not. It's just one check mark. It's a little bit more detailed in GA4 when you look at the data stream settings, where you can see that there are ads measurement consent signals and ad personalization consent signals active. And those are all those things where you can look at if is it really working or is it not working. When you are debugging your outgoing hits, for example, you might run into questions like, do I really need default values? It is perfectly okay just to have an update or just to have default values, as long as you control when you fire your tags. So if you just fire your tags in basic mode, so when there's consent, it should be enough to just have an update done by your consent management tool, for example, and there's nothing more to implement in Google Tag Manager. Those hits look a little bit differently. So where we have had all those R's, now are N's, and those N means they are granted after update, but there was no denied per default before that. Talking about the order, can I have an update or a default after an update? The answer is yes. The hits look perfectly the same. So if you have troubles with race conditions and sometimes the one push happens after the other, it shouldn't be a problem as long as you make sure that you don't fire any tags before both events happened in the data layer. And the last question would be, do I really need to use consent mode features in Google Tag Manager? By that, I mean those features where you can define additional settings where a specific consent would be required for the tags to fire. I was a big fan of that feature, and I even recorded a video about that, but I stopped really using those consent mode features. So if you have a setup that is ready for basic mode, which means you only fire your tags when there's consent, then there is no need to switch to those consent mode features of GTM. You can just stick with your regular triggers that you already had and just make sure that before you fire your tags, consent mode has to be initialized with the right values for all those consent mode flags. Okay, then we are already done with the slides I have, but not without leaving you with the last thought. And this would be about what's about Microsoft. Microsoft UET tags has its own version of consent mode. And there's only one flag, which is add storage, which would be enough for the UET tag to work when you have Microsoft Ads campaigns. But if you never used the Microsoft UET consent mode, or you never heard of it, then are you obliged to implement it even in a basic form in order to send signals over to your Microsoft Ads account in order to make it work, be able to measure conversions? I do not know. So if you know, please reach out to me. My preferred channel would be LinkedIn. And let's discuss what consent mode means for your UET tagging, or whatever questions you might have about consent mode or tagging in general, because that's what I do for many, many years right now. I started with Google Analytics as it was called Urchin. So ask me anything about tagging. I am a Twitter quitter, so you can find me on Blue Sky if you happen to be there. But as I already told you, my preferred channel would be contact me on LinkedIn and let's discuss anything about tracking there. All right. And if there are any questions right now, I think we have much time left for discussing them.
Hi, Markus. There is a ton of questions. So, yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah. So I'm going to start from the Q&A first, then we'll jump over to chat. So the first question, I think this might be a slight typo. It says the chat agent was unable to confirm the availability of a car. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe I'm going to skip that one because it's not clear what that person means. So Paul has asked, when does the REST fire the Google tag on which trigger? Tried multiple options, but still missing update info after consent is given. If wait, for instance, cookie sent updated by user-centrics or a GTM consent update with similar tag. I think Paul's referring to the wait for tag or kind of the 500 milliseconds delay, as in the kind of asynchronous delay. It is not. I think it depends a bit as to which CMP Paul's using, either user-centrics or cookiebot, and if it's via GTM or inline. But yeah, that's kind of probably one that needs to be delved into just to kind of see what's actually how the setup's actually been done. And I don't, it's not, yeah, because there could be multiple things that could stop it from firing in the right order.
Yes, but in every setup you should have a a suited trigger as a replacement for all pages or DOM ready or all that stuff, because you don't know about race conditions and in what order things appear in the data layer. When is the consent management platform ready, and all stuff like this. But if you're using CMOS consent tag, for example, then everything after GTM consent update is safe. So I wouldn't fire anything before that. If you have tags that fire before this GTM consent update is available, then you should find a solution like trigger groups or an event repeater that allow you to trigger all those events after the GTM consent update. Or as you asked about user-centrics, user-centrics has a consent status event. So if user-centrics post this consent status event into the data layer, you can be sure that the consent update already is done by user-centrics if you check the box in your user-centrics backend. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, or Paul, we can always maybe Paul could contact you directly if he needs further information. I do think that Google have standardized the names of fields, i.e. the 7 fields, but then they've forgotten to standardize the event trigger name, which is not great. Yeah, because I think it's, instead of even a data layer push, it's like JavaScript arguments. So there's not a data layer event once the default consent is rendered, which is kind of annoying. There's a question from Clifton. I'm going to paraphrase it slightly. He's asked, will the Digital Markets Act apply to ads in the UK, even if he's not targeting users in the EU? So I think what Clifton means is, if he's got an advertiser that's based in the UK, well, there's 2 parts to that question. One, does it matter if they're targeting UK people? And then the second part is if it's a UK advertiser targeting someone, let's say in Germany.
That's a legal question. But as far as I understand it, DMA is not our problem as advertisers, but Google's problem. So Google will have to obey whatever DMA wants them to do. So I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, for what I've seen, Google is treating the UK as the same as Europe or the EEA. So Google's kind of made that decision that, yeah, you've got to do it. And the kind of ads bot crawler enforcer in essence is going to treat a UK site the same as the German site, as in disable remarketing tags or disable conversion import if those fields are not exposed after the 6th of March. So yeah, I would say if you in the UK, you still need to take action. I think it may be in 6 or 4 months' time the UK may fork from kind of digital markets actual. I think there's a digital markets service bill or something. But yeah, another question from Paul. He said, for instance, if you want some variables based on consent to be true or false, when firing the Google tag on consent updated or later events, value will not be updated until page load. This is a bit kind of going into the weeds. But I think for me, Google GTM has default variables, but it doesn't actually have a default for these consent mode states. So GTM has kind of made it a little bit harder to read what those states are without using like third-party community template tags or CMOS tag that you mentioned. But I'm not really sure I'm not sure what he means by the question on that one.
Me neither. Maybe we can answer that question in the chat room afterwards, because I'm not perfectly sure what it's really about.
Oh, this is a more simpler one. For metapixel only, is it necessary to turn on ad storage parameter in GTM config?
If you refer to these consent mode features that there are in Google Tag Manager and you decide to use them to fire or block triggers, then maybe it's ad storage. at the time I was using this feature still, I usually introduced additional flags like Facebook or TikTok. You can implement a consent default or consent update for any made up key that you want to, and you can enter that in the tag settings as necessary in order to fire. Because by its own, Metapixel doesn't care for consent mode. So this question can only be answered in the context of the consent mode features of Google Tag Manager, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's going to be dependent on how the Facebook kind of ad bot validates, because that would be the same bot that would detect kind of malware and things like that. The one that also detects if there's email addresses captured on landing pages and stuff. So, and yeah, I guess until we know what that bot's going to actually do, it's difficult to know. But I would have thought it makes sense to treat Facebook in the same way as Google. Well, with the exception it doesn't support pings. So I would have thought maybe it wouldn't hurt to kind of turn on the yeah, maybe the two other fields like personalization and add user data, just to keep it standardized. Sophia has asked, do you think it will be illegal to use cookieless pings? I think that question keeps coming up quite a bit.
I think it's unethical. You shouldn't do it. But if it's legal or not, well, ask 3 lawyers, you get 5 different answers, and a DPO might answer the question completely different. But in my opinion, even as a marketer, I wouldn't expect as a visitor of a website who declined or didn't already give consent or explicitly declined tracking consent, I wouldn't expect those pings to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of it was in a previous talk I talked about UFOs or kind of unidentified tracking objects, and yeah, it's a bit like bit like that. In the sense that it's kind of like almost like a tag that's accidentally being sent, even when it's meant to be prevented. But yeah, there's no legal precedence for that, so it's very difficult. There's no like case law, for example. So it's a bit kind of to be decided.
I know of no case where using consent mode was really the reason for suing somebody until now.
Yeah. I mean, it has normally a DPO would only take up that if they think they can win, because if they lost, then that would create a, like we had in the UK, we had a certain tax law about with freelancers, and the UK government lost that case, and it caused massive kind of repercussions. So I would have thought that the regulators would only do it if they're 100% sure. But yeah, that's
and to answer the last question, the you only track once hoodie is available on Amazon. You have just to look for it.
Nice, cool. Okay, I think I've referenced your podcast in the chat, so that people can subscribe to that and on LinkedIn. I'll send you the other questions via a DM. Probably I may need to do it tomorrow morning, or I'll send it as soon as I can. Cool. The link to also send feedback through to Markus, I'm just going to put into chat, which is this one. So if you have additional questions, you can put it in the comments at the end of the feedback, and also that's got the link to the slides on the thank you page. The breakout room I'm just going to put into chat as well, Markus. So for people that we didn't manage to answer their question, or for things that are quite technical and require a screen share, I'd suggest maybe jumping into that. Bear in mind that it's a Zoom link for the breakout room, so you can't be in like 2 places, but the main kind of stream is being recorded. Cool. Thanks for that, Markus. There's a bunch of other questions that were in the actual chat as you were going through that, and a lot of kind of technical pieces that maybe need to be unraveled. But yeah, thank you again for that extremely helpful blog post and for sharing the research that you've done on that. Oh, I shared one other link. So Analytics Debugger have also produced a little decoding tool. I don't know if you saw that, where they take that kind of almost the consent mode v2 hash and tell you what it means, which is
It
quite a
will be
nice
part
little
of the
way.
next release, so I hope it's much more usable if it's inside the tool.
Yeah, it's not in their plugin yet, but they've just built it as a separate kind of like web app sort of thing.
All right, then
So
thanks for having me. I will switch to the chat room right now.
cool, brilliant. Thank you again, Markus.
Bye, everyone.